Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
It was one of those Sunday dinners that pretends to be warm and fuzzy, like a Hallmark movie on mute, while the real soundtrack underneath is judgment, pressure, and that brand of quiet parental disapproval that slices deeper than anything screamed ever could. The dining room table was set the same way it always had been since I was a kid: Mom's roast chicken, Dad's mashed potatoes with too much butter. The hideous crocheted table runner my grandmother insisted on gifting one Christmas when I was 16 and somehow never left. My sister Emily was already glowing before she said a damn word, sitting there in a soft lilac sweater like she'd just stepped out of a maternity photo shoot, her hand nervously twitching toward the waistband of her jeans as if her barely there baby bump needed protection from words, air, life itself. And then she said it, with a tremble in her voice and her husband Nate squeezing her hand under the table. She told them they were expecting. Just like that. No build-up, no drama, no dessert course. Just 3 words that detonated across the room like an emotional grenade. We're having a baby. My mother screamed, actually screamed, and then started crying in that way women cry when their entire soul decides to leak out all at once. My father stood up, walked over to Emily, and wrapped her in one of those rare, reverent hugs that made you think maybe he used to be someone softer, someone human. Then came the line, the one that knocked the wind right out of me and still, even now, rings in my ears like a bad echo in an empty room. My dad pulled back from the hug, turned toward Mom, and said, "Now this is what real success looks like." He didn't say it to hurt me, I think. He said it like a man announcing a touchdown at a football game, like a proud coach on the sidelines finally seeing his team win. But the moment he said it, I could feel my chest cave in, like something ancient inside me had just shattered for good. And still, I smiled. I smiled because I'm a fucking pro at pretending. I smiled because I've had practice in sterile doctors' offices, wrapped in paper gowns that tear too easily, while some stranger with a clipboard tells you your eggs are tired or your uterus is stubborn or your body just doesn't cooperate the way it should. I smiled because the last time I broke down in front of them, my mother gave me herbal tea and told me to relax. Maybe it's all in your head. I smiled because I had to, because what else was I going to do? Throw my plate across the room? Shout about hormone shots and procedures and miscarriages they never even knew about? Tell them that I had once been pregnant for 12 weeks and lost it in a goddamn Walgreens bathroom stall while no one picked up their phone? No. I smiled. I watched them celebrate her, and I clinked my wine glass with theirs, and I told Emily I was happy for her. I even meant it in a way. She didn't ask to be the golden child. She didn't build the pedestal they placed her on. Hell, maybe she wanted to get off it sometimes and be seen as just human too. But that didn't stop the burn. That didn't stop the truth. I was 38, infertile, and apparently a failure in my parents' eyes. And you know what hurt the most? They knew. They knew what I had been through. They had sat in the hospital waiting room after my ectopic pregnancy almost killed me. They had come over with casseroles when I came home from my 3rd failed round of IVF and couldn't stop crying long enough to eat. They had watched me waste 5 years of savings on a dream that refused to come true. They knew everything, but none of that mattered. Because Emily was pregnant. Emily, who once said she didn't even want kids until she was at least 40. Emily, who got knocked up 6 months after her wedding without trying. Emily, whose life seemed to unfold on cue like a carefully rehearsed stage play. After dinner, I stayed behind to help clean up while they huddled around Emily in the living room, rubbing her stomach like it was a genie lamp. I scrubbed dishes in silence, letting the water run too long, pretending I was busy so I didn't have to sit and listen to them pick baby names like they were brainstorming investment portfolios. When I finally got in my car that night, the cold hit me so fast I couldn't breathe. I turned the ignition, stared straight ahead into the dark driveway, and whispered to myself something I hadn't dared say out loud in months. They think I'll never be a mother. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. They were wrong. My eyes narrowed, and I felt the tiniest spark light somewhere deep inside me, low and mean and fierce. Dead wrong. There's a certain kind of silence that creeps into your life when you stop fighting the same damn battle over and over. A silence that doesn't come with peace or relief, but rather a dull ache, like your body remembers the war even after the war is done. After the final failed IVF attempt, I didn't scream or cry or break anything. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at a single red on the sheet, and I knew it was over. Not because the doctors had said so, not because I couldn't afford another round, but because something inside me, something I didn't even know still had a voice, finally whispered enough. For months afterward, I moved like a ghost through my own life, showing up to work, answering texts, faking laughter at baby showers, all while my insides felt hollowed out like some cursed pumpkin on Halloween. I deleted all the fertility apps from my phone. I boxed up the baby onesies I'd once bought on impulse, the tiny knitted hat someone had given me just in case, the sonogram photo I'd kept hidden at the back of my nightstand. Then I threw the box in the attic, shut the door, and told myself I was done. But being done with something doesn't mean you stop feeling it. The grief lingered in strange ways. I'd find myself crying at dog food commercials or avoiding the diaper aisle at the grocery store like it was radioactive. And then one day, while scrolling through my phone at 3 a.m, I found myself reading about volunteer opportunities in the city. I don't know what I was looking for, maybe a distraction, maybe a reason to get out of bed, maybe a life raft. What I found was a youth mentorship program at a nearby shelter. They called it Haven House, and it wasn't anything fancy. The paint was chipped, the lighting flickered in the hallway, and the couches in the rec room looked like they'd seen better decades. But there was warmth in that place, a kind of raw, exhausted warmth that didn't ask for much, just consistency and care. So I signed up. The first few weeks, the kids didn't know what to do with me. I didn't blame them. I was just another adult who showed up smiling and probably wouldn't stick around. But I kept showing up. Week after week, I played board games, read stories, helped with math homework, and tried my best not to cry in the parking lot afterward. Some of those kids had seen more darkness by age 8 than most people see in a lifetime. They didn't need me to fix anything. They just needed someone who didn't leave. And that's how I met Jamal. He was 10 when I first noticed him, always sitting in the corner of the rec room with his hoodie pulled up and a notebook in his lap. He didn't talk much, but his eyes watched everything, and when he finally did speak, it was always something sharp and unexpected, like he'd been storing up thoughts and was carefully rationing them out. He started calling me Miss K by the 3rd week, a soft nickname that made my heart twist a little every time. He was the kind of kid who acted like he didn't need anybody, but you could tell he wanted someone to ask why he never smiled in photos, someone to notice when he went quiet for too long. I found out later his mom had died 2 years earlier from an overdose, and his dad had vanished into some other state with a new girlfriend and a different life. Jamal was alone in a way most people couldn't begin to understand. And maybe that's why we connected. Because I was alone too. I started coming more often. I visited that shelter for over 3 years, almost every day of the week. That's like, what, for 100 days a year? I brought snacks, board games, books. I taught him how to cook scrambled eggs without burning them and how to fix a button on his shirt. We built cardboard cities and paper airplanes and eventually, routines. Some days he'd sit beside me and say nothing, and that was okay. Other days he'd talk for hours, telling me stories about kids at school, about a dream he had where we lived in a house with a red door and a dog named Clutch. Sometimes he called me Miss K, but sometimes, when he forgot himself, he'd just say, Mom. He always corrected himself right after, but each time he did it, it carved something deeper in me, like a truth neither of us was quite ready to say out loud. I never brought it up, never made it awkward. I just let it sit there, quiet and warm, like a little seed waiting for the right season. Then one Thursday, it had been a brutal week, one of those weeks where work was hell, my car battery died, and I got a voicemail from my sister bragging about her baby learning to walk. I showed up at the shelter worn thin. I didn't even try to fake it. I just sank into the couch next to Jamal, closed my eyes, and exhaled like my soul was leaking out. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, so soft I almost didn't hear it, he asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded, too tired to lie, and whispered, "Just a hard day." Jamal was quiet again for a few beats. Then he looked up at me, his voice barely more than breath, and said something that cracked my heart wide open. "Can I stay with you forever?" And just like that, everything I thought I knew about the shape my life had taken shifted. Because I wasn't done. Not really. I had just started to build something I never saw coming. There's a certain kind of strength that doesn't announce itself with raised voices or clenched fists, but rather slips into your bones quietly, like a second skeleton made of resolve. That was the kind of strength I needed when I began the process of adopting Jamal, an exhausting, humiliating, slow-motion crawl through a system that seemed determined to remind me at every turn that I wasn't enough. Not married. Not wealthy. Not young. Not ideal. Just a woman with an aching heart, a stable income, and a boy who'd already started to call her home with his eyes, even before the paperwork gave us permission. The first visit from Child Protective Services felt more like an interrogation than an evaluation, the caseworker sitting in my too-clean living room, clicking her pen every few seconds like a metronome for my nerves. She asked how I'd discipline Jamal, what I'd do if he got suspended, what trauma training I'd completed, how I'd handle him acting out. I wanted to scream that love was the answer to every goddamn question, but instead I nodded, handed her printed files, and tried not to flinch when she scanned my bookshelf like it held the secrets of my soul. Every step came with a new hoop: background checks, home visits, court filings, psychological evaluations, parenting classes. I jumped through them all, bruised my spirit on a few, and kept my mouth shut when it would have felt so much better to scream. I didn't tell my parents what I was doing. I didn't tell my sister either. I knew exactly what kind of response I'd get, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Not from people who still equated family with biology, who acted like my uterus was a prerequisite for legitimacy. I wasn't ready for the looks of pity or the patronizing advice, or worse, the judgment disguised as concern. Meanwhile, their world spun in a different orbit, one where everything revolved around Emily's growing belly. The group chat lit up daily with ultrasound photos, stroller recommendations, name polls, and links to Pinterest boards full of pastel dreams. My mother started signing off texts with things like "love," "grandma-to-be," as though her entire identity was being rewritten by a fetus. It was like watching a movie you weren't cast in, just an extra standing off to the side while the credits rolled without your name. And then came the baby shower, hosted by my sister's best friend in some upscale venue with gold trim on the invitations, and a gift registry that included a $500 diaper pail. I got the invite late, probably as an afterthought, and almost didn't go at all. But something in me, maybe spite, maybe courage, maybe just that deep human craving to be seen, decided to show up. I arrived late on purpose, walking in after the games had started and the wine had been poured, clutching my purse with the adoption approval papers tucked inside, folded neatly between a card and a $20 baby blanket I picked up last minute. No one noticed me at first. My mother was holding court near the mimosa bar, laughing loudly, her hand never straying far from Emily's rounded stomach like it was a sacred relic. My father was off in a corner, nodding along to some other dad's story about car seats and sleep training. No one looked up when I entered, not even my sister, who was busy opening a mountain of pink-wrapped gifts and thanking people with that bright, camera-ready smile that makes everything feel like a staged photo op. I hovered near the back, pretending to admire the decorations. Everything was white and gold, with soft blush accents, like they were planning to raise this child in a damn Instagram filter. A balloon arch shaped like a heart stood above the cake table, where the main attraction sat on display like a centerpiece at a wedding. It was a 3-tiered masterpiece, fondant flowers and edible pearls, and in bold scripted frosting across the middle layer it said, "Finally a real imam in the family." The words hit like a gut punch. I don't know who wrote them or whether they meant it as a jab at me or just didn't think at all, but it landed with surgical precision. I stood there, staring at that cake, while laughter floated around me like background noise in a dream. I reached into my purse, felt the edges of that crisp approval letter, and thought about every night I'd stayed awake worrying if I'd be allowed to keep Jamal. I thought about how he'd crawled into my bed the first time he had a nightmare and whispered, "Don't leave, okay?" I thought about how many people saw children as accessories or status symbols or trophies, and how he was none of those things. He was my son, not because of shared blood, but because we chose each other in a world that tried to convince us we were unworthy of love. I leaned a little closer to the cake, close enough that no one else could hear me, and let the words slip out slow and steady, like a promise carved in stone. "We'll see about that." There's something about the drive to your childhood home during the holidays that dredges up all the shit you thought you'd already buried under years of therapy, hard-earned distance, and selective forgetting. The trees, the cracked sidewalks, the porch light your dad still hasn't fixed since last winter, it all hits like a wave of memory you didn't consent to. And yet there I was, gripping the steering wheel a little too tight, glancing in the rearview mirror every few minutes at Jamal, who sat in the backseat like a bundle of nerves wrapped in a clip-on tie and the kind of sweater that makes little boys look like tiny professors. He'd been quiet the whole ride, eyes darting between the window and his hands folded in his lap, like he was preparing for some test no one had studied for. I didn't blame him. It was his first time meeting them, not just my parents, but the whole family unit in one place. My sister, her husband, her baby, the cousins, the casserole crowd, the judgment hall. I tried to explain it would be overwhelming, that they might not understand right away, but he just nodded and said, "I got you, Miss K," which hit me harder than it probably should have, considering he hadn't called me that in weeks. The adoption had gone through 2 months earlier, final, legal, done. He was mine in every way that counted, and yet I hadn't told my family. Not in person. Not on a call. Not even in a damn text. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was self-preservation. Maybe it was that deep part of me that still believed they'd find some way to ruin it, to reduce it, to strip it of the meaning it had grown to hold. But now the secret was sitting in my backseat, swinging his feet and clutching a homemade card in his hand that said "Happy Thanksgiving" in pencil, with a badly drawn turkey wearing sunglasses. I parked the car, took a breath, and looked back at him. "You ready?" I asked, voice steady even though my stomach felt like it was doing flips. He gave me a half smile, more brave than joyful, and said, "Yeah, I guess." Then he opened the door and stepped out, shoes crunching on the gravel like the opening note of some symphony I wasn't sure how to conduct. Inside, the house smelled like sage and cinnamon and too many expectations. The living room was loud, full of voices talking over each other, and the TV was blaring some football game that no one was really watching. My sister was there, of course, baby on her hip, dressed like she was hosting a cooking show instead of feeding her relatives. My parents were orbiting her like moons around a sun, their entire attention gravitationally locked on that squirming bundle of new life she carried. No one saw us walk in at first. I stood in the doorway, Jamal close beside me, holding my hand tighter than usual. He didn't say a word, just looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes, like he was waiting for a signal. So I gave him one. I squeezed his hand back, smiled, and stepped into the room. My mom was the first to notice. She turned, blinked like she was seeing a ghost, and then plastered on a smile too wide to be real. "Oh! You made it, honey," she said, her voice all helium and habit, eyes flicking to Jamal for a fraction of a second before returning to the baby like she couldn't afford to waste attention on anything else. I introduced him casually, like I would any friend. "This is Jamal. He's with me now." That was all I said. No fanfare. No explanation. Just the truth in a quiet voice, letting it hang in the air like a question no one was brave enough to ask. Jamal didn't say much either. He stayed close, polite, quiet, probably trying not to make a wrong move. He helped carry in the pie, set the napkins, and smiled when my aunt tried to ruffle his hair like he was some kind of pet she wasn't sure how to greet. No one asked who he really was. No one asked why he was there. They just accepted his presence like you accept the weather, silently, passively, with mild discomfort when it gets too close. Dinner was a parade of small talk and forced laughter, the kind of surface-level conversation that scratches nothing deeper than the crust. Emily's baby got passed around like royalty, kissed and cooed at and praised like a tiny god sent down to validate every life choice my parents ever made. I watched them light up every time he drooled or farted or sneezed, and I sat there quietly, cutting turkey into small pieces for Jamal, making sure he had enough gravy, letting my silence speak for me. Then it happened. Halfway through dinner, as we were passing around the mashed potatoes, Jamal looked up from his plate, his voice soft but clear enough to cut through every meaningless conversation swirling around the table. "Mom," he said, "can you pass the mashed potatoes?" The room froze. Forks hovered midair. Glasses stopped mid-sip. Conversations died in throats. The silence was so heavy I thought it might crack the walls. Jamal didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, but pretended not to. He just kept his eyes on me, waiting for the potatoes, as if nothing seismic had just taken place. I passed them to him without missing a beat, smiled gently, and said, "Of course." It was my father who broke the stillness, coughing like the word had gotten caught in his throat, his face a slow-burn shade of confusion and something dangerously close to rage. "What did he just call you?" he muttered, his voice sharp and low, like he already knew the answer and hated it more than he could explain. And I looked him dead in the eye, with a calm I hadn't felt in years, and thought to myself, now we begin. There's a particular kind of silence that only follows truth dropped like a stone into a still, shallow pond, the kind that doesn't break loudly, but instead ripples outward, spreading discomfort through every corner of the room, dragging eyes to the floor and forcing smiles to die in their tracks. That's what it felt like after my father asked that question, after Jamal called me mom, after the mask cracked and the performance of family we'd all been starring in fell apart under the weight of a single honest word. And the worst part was how familiar it felt, like we'd been heading to this moment our whole lives, like the awkwardness had just been waiting for the right spark to ignite. I didn't flinch. I didn't stammer. I looked him square in the face, that same face that once kissed my scraped knees and fixed my bike chain and taught me how to drive a stick shift, and I said clearly, he's my son. It took exactly 3 seconds for the room to lose its damn mind. My sister let out a breathy scoff like someone had just dropped a glass of red wine on her white carpet. "Seriously," she said, slamming her fork down so hard the plate rattled beneath it. "You couldn't let one day be about me? You had to pull this now? What, you adopt a kid and think that makes you a mom?" I didn't answer her, not right away. I watched my mother's face twist into something halfway between confusion and grief, her lip trembling like she was about to deliver a monologue she'd been rehearsing in the mirror for decades. She blinked too many times and finally whispered, "You adopted him? You didn't even tell us." 6 months ago, I said, keeping my voice even. It was finalized in August. The room blurred around the edges, a cacophony of overlapping voices, forks clattering, someone standing up too fast and knocking over a chair. Jamal's hand gripped mine under the table, tight and small, his eyes wide and watching, and I wanted to gather him up and take him somewhere quiet, somewhere kind. But I didn't move. I stayed planted, let the storm rage around us, let them show me exactly who they were when they didn't get to control the narrative. My father stood up then, slowly, like a man preparing to deliver a verdict, and looked at me with a disgust that felt like acid behind his teeth. "That's not the same," he said. "You didn't give birth. You didn't," he paused, shaking his head, "you didn't make him." And that was it. That was the line. The final crack in the dam. I stood up, raised my glass, not to toast, but to cut, and let every word fall sharp and slow like a blade being dragged across years of silence. "You want to talk about what makes a real mother?" Is it blood? Is it a hospital wristband and a baby picture in a scrapbook you never open again? Or is it sitting through court dates and trauma counselors and nights when a 10-year-old wakes up screaming from dreams he can't explain? Is it love that you earn, not love that just happens to show up in your DNA? My mother whispered my name like a warning, but I wasn't stopping. Not now. Not after swallowing their bullshit for years. Let's talk about success, I said, letting my eyes sweep across them. Let's talk about how you define it. Is it the daughter who gave you a grandchild you could show off on Facebook? The one who did everything in the right order, even when she didn't want it? Or is it the daughter who built a life after everything fell apart, who kept showing up for a kid no one else cared about? Emily muttered, "Jesus, you're really doing this now," and pushed back her chair like she was ready to bolt, but I wasn't done. I set down my glass and dropped the final piece, the one I'd carried for years like a stone in my chest. I was pregnant once, I said, calm and flat and final. You just never noticed. You were too busy praising someone else's stomach. The room collapsed into stunned silence. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain when or how or what had happened after. I didn't offer them closure or clarity, because they hadn't earned that. Let them sit with it. Let them feel for once what it meant to not know, to wonder, to ache over an answer they'd never get. Jamal looked up at me then, his hand still wrapped in mine, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not even pride. Just a calm knowing that I had finally taken back the narrative they stole. I turned to him, knelt slightly, and whispered, "You ready to go, kiddo?" He nodded, slipped his small hand into mine, and together we walked past the stunned table, past the unspoken judgments and broken illusions, past the cold turkey and the untouched pie, and out the front door without looking back. As we reached the porch, he paused, tugged my sleeve, and said, "Mom." "Yeah?" I answered, already knowing I'd never get tired of hearing it. He didn't say anything else. Just hugged me tight, face pressed against my stomach, and in that moment, it didn't matter how many of them didn't understand. It didn't matter who disapproved or who stayed stuck in their own shallow definitions. Because some scars don't show. Some families aren't blood. And some revenge is as simple as being called Mom at the right moment. And inside, behind that shut door, my father finally lowered his eyes.